There's something about working in the Halo universe that I've always loved. It's in the lore, it's in the world, it's in the characters and the potential for characters. Other universes just don't have it like Halo does. Halo's feel is unique in a way that I'm not really sure how to describe, and it evokes emotions inside me that other sci-fi franchises just don't. So, of course, when I started making Machinima back in 2008, one of my first projects was a sequel to Halo 3. After a few misfires that never saw the light of day, thank God, Spartans aired in late 2009. I constructed Spartans to be a possible canonical sequel to Halo 3, and focused my efforts on capturing and emulating the feel of a Halo campaign, and I think I did a really good job at that, but there is a huge problem that I didn't realize until after I'd finished the series. I never laid in a real background for the story. The most it had telling people that it took place after Halo 3 was a single sentence in the prologue episode. So I had Spartans and the entire Reach trilogy standing on a frame with barely any groundwork whatsoever. So, considering my plans for the future of what I now call the Spartan Legacy, I figured I needed to first take a trip to the past and establish the first events that set Spartans and the Reach trilogy in motion. I knew I had to explain the origins of Saul, Catherine, and their ill-fated teammates as they fought in the Second War, as well as defining what the Second War was. Cue Spartans Generation. The word generation has a dual meaning in this production's context. First, as the act or process of generating, to generate, to create, to begin, and as the classic definition, a group of people born and living at the same time. With the Spartan 2s and 3s missing or dead by the end of Halo 3, a new class of Spartans had to pick up the title and continue their predecessors' work. They were created as a quick, desperate, high-risk project. This really allowed me to redefine the definition of Spartans, since they weren't the robotic shut-ins that the past Spartans were. They had a much greater range of emotion, and that basically redefined what Spartans were. It was interesting to write the 4s as they explored what it meant to be both a super soldier and a human. I had actually been toying with this story since around 2011. At first I was going to write it as a novel, but that fell to the wayside as other events came up. A few years later, after the Reach trilogy had been completed, I started thinking about making it as a machinima. At first I was going to make it in Halo 3, but I just never got around to it. Eventually I got to thinking about sequels to the Reach trilogy, but I stopped myself and said, hold on, before I go any further, I better go back and fix up the beginning. When Halo 2 Anniversary was unveiled, I saw my chance. Halo 2 Anniversary had everything I needed to make the prequel. Yeah, it most definitely had its flaws. The Master Chief Collection was prone to server crashes and lagouts, and didn't have the option to save films permanently, and featured limited customization options. I managed to work with the customization limits as I didn't really need any crazy armor for this one, and all I had to do to work around the save film problem was capture groups of scenes immediately after I shot them before they disappeared. It was the server crashes and disconnects that were the worst. A couple of times we'd be nearly finished with a difficult scene and then the game would crash. When that happens, it doesn't save the game in theater. We'd have to redo the whole thing over again. This happened 3 or 4 times. Also, for whatever reason, the Master Chief Collection doesn't let people join custom games already in progress, so if a main character lagged out of the shoot, we'd have to end the game, invite him back, and start the scene from scratch. It was very, very frustrating. For all its flaws, though, making Machinima and Halo 2 Anniversary had a lot of good points. The improved Forge allowed me to create some incredible locations. Scripting for lights and gates was really handy to finally have. The weapon lowering animation worked flawlessly, and nearly all the character animations are nice and fluid. Having stuff like the Hornet, Gungoose, Red Energy Sword, and the Heretic Banshee was really nice too. And of course, the graphics and lighting are all top-notch. Working through or around the game's problems was definitely worth it, and I think Generation turned out great. It just goes to show what you can do if you don't give up. Production started back in late 2014 when I was in college. Progress moved slowly as I was juggling work, a relationship, a second Machinima project, and school, although that last one didn't last very long. During production, I switched jobs twice, moved across town, quit college, and went through the various other things that will happen in a year. Almost painfully, I got through writing, set creation, puppeteering, filming, editing, voice acting, and post-production. I was very worried when it came to the puppeteering. Luckily, fan response when I asked for help was huge, and lots of people joined in to help. It's always interesting to work with so many great fans, and I owe all of them for their help. These Machinimas wouldn't exist without them. The very last scene of Episode 4 and the battles outside of Thalashi's hiding place in Episode 5 are all actually direct recreations of scenes from the original Spartans Episode 00. It's at that point where Spartans' generation overlaps with the original Spartans. I knew I had to change a few things, like giving Gabe, Cameron, Jake, and Christian better and more believable deaths to fit their characters, but a lot of it is just recreated by memory or by cross-referencing with the original episode. I thought it was really interesting to go back and redo work that I'd already done about 6 years ago. You can see when watching the episode that some shots, especially during the battle where they crash land and then get the Warthog, are shot-for-shot recreated from Episode 00. Originally, there was supposed to be a three-parter mini-series to go along with Spartan's Generation, the kind of like the Tales of the Reach trilogy that I did for the Reach trilogy back in 2013. There was supposed to be 3 stories. The first one, which actually was the only one that got written and fleshed out, was Operation F. You can see the roots of Operation F in the beginning of Episode 5, when Commander Gray is talking to the Spartans, and the sergeant comes up to him and says, "Sir, we need you over here." There's a barricade of Marines around the center building of the base. And what was going on was, during the Elite attack, they accidentally released some flood specimens that Oni was keeping inside the base that they found during Halo 3 when the flood ship crashed into Africa. Now, Gray originally was going to have to go in there, fight the flood, and blow everything up just to keep the flood at bay. There was 2 more. There was one that was supposed to revolve around Commander Thalashi during about the first couple of episodes, where he would move through the abandoned city of Tripoli and cut down some human resistance. The other one was about Sergeant Scott and a team of Marines as they defended the base during the Elite's attack in Episode 4. Now, like I said, the only one that really got finished was Operation F, the first one. The rest of them never got written, the sets never got made, and I basically had to cut everything due to a time restraint. I need to move on to other Machinimas, and I just didn't have enough time to get these 3 done. I didn't deem them interesting or important enough to actually finish making. Just interesting ideas. Also, the purpose of these shorter films was basically to give some of the characters a little more dialogue, a little extra more screen time, like Commander Gray, Sergeant Scott, and Commander Thalashi. Well, Commander Gray and Sergeant Scott are going to be getting more screen time in Spartans Omega Halo anyway. Sergeant Scott will be playing a much bigger role than he did, and Commander Gray will be resuming his role as the important leader. So basically that only leaves Commander Thalashi, who is now dead and will not be getting any more screen time. That's unfortunate, because he was a really cool character, but I really just don't think there was much more that I could do with him. There was also a cut scene in Episode 4, where right before Commander Harper dies, Saul is teleported into the Hollow Room. And he doesn't initially end up right next to Harper and Thalashi. He actually ends up in Lockout's Flood Room, and he looks at the Flood for a minute, and it's foreshadowing, because the Flood is eventually what kills Saul. And I was originally going to have that scene, but I cut it for a couple reasons. First, and most importantly, it kind of ruined the pacing. There wasn't really any reason to have it between the scene before the Hollow Room and the scene where Harper dies. And then the other reason for that was it kind of didn't fit in with the established canonical fact that Saul had never seen Flood before the Omega Halo incident. So basically, for those reasons, that got cut. Writing all these new characters, the Fours, Commander Harper, Thalashi, and Sergeant Scott, namely, opened up some new spots for voice actors, and I knew going into this project that I wanted to scope out some talent. Spartan's Generation was my first machinima to have a bunch of new actors enlisted online. Over half the cast, actually, and I'm really pleased with who I found. A lot of people auditioned. Lots were great, but just didn't make the cut. Others auditioned for certain characters, but ending up getting roles they didn't quite expect. Draven Kewen and Mason Orr came back to voice Cameron and Christian, respectively. Both of them were in Biker on 3, Draven as Warren and Mason as Alex, and both will be playing major characters in Odd Men Out Season 2. Both did outstanding jobs in Spartan's Generation. Draven's portrayal of Cameron 4-03 was exactly how I imagined it. Cameron had some doubts about himself along the way, but always managed to be steadfastly loyal, and really supported Saul through the hard times. Draven's really spot on about that sort of thing. He's been a good friend to me since I've known him. Mason brought Christian 4-05 to life as the youngest and most human of the team, stubborn, energetic, and always positive. There was one moment during the editing period that I found really interesting. When Catherine and Christian are having the conversation about Saul in episode 4, Christian says, "Hey, none of that, he'll be back, you'll see." What I intended for that line was for Christian to be comforting Catherine. However, when Mason did the line, he interpreted it differently and made it sound as though Christian was angry at Catherine for saying Saul was dead.
None of that. He'll be back. You'll see.
Both versions of the line could have worked. My version showed that Christian sees Catherine worrying about Saul and moves to comfort her, reassuring that Saul will return and trying to move some of his own confidence to her. It also reinforces the fact that Christian is the most human of the Spartans and expresses positive emotions more easily, as well as the need to comfort Catherine because he had her back, as he discussed earlier in the conversation. And Mason's showed that Christian is confronted with the fact that Saul might not return, and becomes angry with Catherine for suggesting it, causing him to have a harsher tone when speaking to her. He has great faith in his leader and is bothered by A, that the others do not share the same fate, and B, that Saul may let him and the others down by not actually coming back. I wasn't sure which one to put in, so Mason and I discussed it. I could tell Mason really loved playing Christian, and it was very enjoyable for me to hear so much of enthusiasm in his lines. Eventually, we went ahead and went with my version. Both Mason and I agreed that that was the more natural version for Christian, and it fit him perfectly. Peter McDonald Ryder originally auditioned for Gabe, Harper, and Scott, but once I heard his voice, I knew I had who I wanted for Jake 4-02. Peter speaks quickly, softly, and curtly, and that's pretty much who Jake is, and he and Mason really did a good job on developing Christian and Jake's friendship. Anytime they talk is some of my favorite dialogue. I think it's funny because they mesh so well, but the two actors have never actually met. Some of Peter's voice reels really made me crack up. The guy loves voice acting, and I'm really happy to add him to the team. When it came to Gabe 4-06, I got a ton of auditions. Gabe must have seemed like a really attractive role to play, but only one really clicked. When I spoke with Morgan Dale, he told me that when I said I wanted a Sev vibe for Gabe, he knew exactly what I meant, and he gave me exactly what I wanted. Morgan's delivery of Gabe was so godly perfect, I don't think anyone could have done better. He was quiet when he needed to be, he was explosive when he needed to be, and he made the conflicts between his character and mine some of the best I've ever produced. Unfortunately, I've had trouble getting into contact with Morgan since he finished his lines, so I'm not sure he'll be lending us his talent again. Whatever he chooses, I thank him dearly for his work here. Tristan Mack is an old friend. I've known him for a while over Xbox Live, and he's done plenty of puppeteering for me. I was thrilled to have him aboard, and I set him up as Sergeant Scott. I really like the way he plays the good sergeant, and Scott's become one of my favorite side characters. I can't wait to bring him back for Spartans Omega Halo, where he's going to have a much bigger role, and meanwhile I'm hoping to have Tristan play some characters in my projects between now and then. Originally, I was going to have Gracia Charles, the voice of Butler in On Men Out and Ward in Biker on 3, play Commander Thalashi. While Gracia signed on for it, he was unfortunately too busy to complete the role. My good friend Hugh Verhellehuyen, I sincerely hope I'm pronouncing that right, recommended Deldauer to me. Deldauer more or less ensured that the project got released on schedule, as he was quick to jump into the role and complete his lines. Initially, he provided me with 3 different voices for Thalashi. A more neutral villain in tuxedo voice,
until all that is left
a sort of Jamaican one, which I actually really like and would love to use sometime,
the will of the shipmaster be done,
and the one that ended up being Thalashi. That voice still gives me the chills. Definitely one of my favorite portrayals in any of my creations. As for Hugh himself, the general consensus is that he stole the show as Commander Harper. When I preview the first few episodes with my family and girlfriend, they keep asking, is that his natural voice? And were shocked when I told them no. Hugh gave Harper one of the most unique voices I've ever heard. He really mastered that old, wise leader sort of voice. It's obvious he's very talented, and, if he pleases, will definitely be returning for other projects. Coming back to Saul was interesting for me. He really developed as I wrote the series. In Spartans back in 09, he was basically just your standard gruff, badass super soldier. In Generation, he sort of became a man with the weight of the world on his shoulders. It's a lot to realize that you're dependent on to lead the people that are supposed to save the entire human race. If he messes up, then humanity dies, and when he fails to save Harper and his teammates from dying, that really hits him hard. It's only with the support of Cameron and the rest of the team that he gets back on his feet. Catherine, on the other hand, doesn't really recover as the hits keep on coming. She's already lost a lot, and now she just tries to push her emotions aside and bottle them up. She's much more clammed up than she is later down the road in Reach the Last War. Spartan's generation is where she starts to unravel, and if you watch the series in order, you can see how she becomes more emotionally troubled and unstable as her team gets killed, Saul sacrifices himself for her, and Gray passes away. By the time she joins Phoenix team, she's damn near loose cannon, but Saul's advice to her, to have hope, stays with her till the end. Hope is actually her very last spoken word, at least when she's alive. Catherine has always been one of my favorite characters to write, but she wouldn't be as complex and real as she is without my sister. Carrie really seems to get Catherine more than I do, and Catherine's development is really all thanks to Carrie's input. Hilariously enough, some cast members seem to have trouble pronouncing things correctly. Deldor kept saying Cairo instead of Cairo, and it took Mason 4 or 5 takes to say Tripoli right. Half the cast agreed that Thalashi's name should not be pronounced Thalashi, but Thalashi. Unfortunately, Morgan was one, and since I couldn't contact him for redos, those lines had to make it into the final production. Kinda awkward in episode 5 when Gabe says Thalashi and Saul says Thalashi immediately afterward. It was a long road to the end of Spartan's generation. I'm really happy with the result. I've taken major strides with this one, and I know I'm only going to keep on growing with each production I make. Near the end of the production cycle, I decided I was going to remake the original Spartans as Spartans Omega Halo, sort of a sequel to Spartan's generation and a remake of Spartans at the same time, so that's coming. I'm really excited for it. It's going to make Spartans actually watchable now. I really hope everyone enjoyed Spartan's generation. So much soul and blood and sweat and tears was put into it, not only by me, but by everyone who participated. I'm really starting to like being open to the community and working with all these new people. There are so many great ideas and suggestions that I used to close myself off to. Spartan's generation was very heavily influenced by other people's output. I think it turned out really well. Was there stuff I could have done better? Of course, I recognize that. Every machinima I make is a learning experience. Helps me make the next one better. It's a lot of work to make a machinima like this, but when it's completed, it's so rewarding. Makes it worth it every time.